Okay, we're here tonight to hopefully, so you people, can meet two of the candidates that are running for state senate office. 31st District is, they're two dynamic people. I know them both, and I know you've seen them around too. So let me introduce them to you. First one I'd like to introduce is Kevin Daley. Kevin was a representative for us before. So welcome, Kevin, please. Thank you. And also Gary Glenn is representative right now, as a matter of fact. And we're also welcome to have him. And these gentlemen are here to try to answer any questions that you may have and to tell you a little bit about what their program is and how they think they can help us in the future. And I know they can. So with that, we'll get started here. I'll tell you that we have Judge Holowka. Yeah, I'm not very good at this, guys. I'm sorry. The judge is our mediator, and he's taking your questions here, and the judge is going to ask the candidates these questions. The way it works is each candidate will have 2 minutes for an opening statement. They have 90 seconds to answer questions and 30 seconds for a rebuttal if one candidate is named by another candidate, and 1 minute for a closing statement. So that's how it's going to work. And the judge is going to ask the questions, and he's going to be the ruling person here in this meeting. Whatever he said goes, and that's the way it works. So, Judge, thank you very much and welcome.
Thank you, Tim. And thank everybody for, I don't know if it's, there you go. Thank you for coming this evening. And again, as I want to say, this is not a debate, this is a forum. And the purpose of a forum is to know the positions of the candidates. There should be no applause or booing or anything like that. Again, hopefully the candidates are sophisticated individuals. We're going to alternate. We're going to start with one gentleman is going to be asked a question. He's going to answer. Then the other party, the second question, will go the opposite way. So the same person isn't asked the first question all the time. And again, we're going to start with opening statement that they have 2 minutes. And then at the end, we're going to have closing statements by them. And looking at this, since we have somebody who's visiting Lapeer County, the visitor, Mr. Glenn, if you want to give a 2-minute opening statement, you may go. And whether you want to sit or stand, whatever more comfortable for you.
Thank you, Your Honor. By the way, we had Chris N. Hall at the Capitol last week, and only about half a dozen legislators came, but I was certainly among them. I want to introduce myself. I'm Gary Glenn. For the last 3 years, I've represented rural parts of Bay County and parts of Midland County in the state legislature. Chairman of the House Energy Policy Committee and elected by the Republican caucus as the Associate Speaker of the House pro tem. I was a speaker at the very first Tea Party rally in April of 2009 at the Tea Party up in Bay County. I was also a speaker at one of your big Tea Party rallies at the courthouse at the same time. I am a conservative Republican, a free market Republican. The American Conservative Union ranked me the most conservative member of the House each of the first 2 years that I was in office. It was important for me, on your behalf, to prove that you didn't have to compromise your conservative principles to be effective. So while being judged by the ACU as the most conservative member of the House, the media who covered the state capitol named me the most effective first-term legislator, freshman legislator of the year. I've served my country in uniform. I'm the only veteran in this race. I swore an oath at about 13, an Eagle Scout. On my honor, I'll do my best to do my duty to God and my country. 20 years later, took another oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I think my wife would tell me, and my constituents would tell you, that I have an overdeveloped sense of duty. I was raised by a World War II Marine who survived the attack on Pearl Harbor, taught me to love my country, stand up for what I believe in, be willing to fight for those I love, and it's something I take seriously. I don't live in Lapeer County, so I'm hoping that some of you think it's more important where a candidate stands than where a candidate lives. And I'll give you some examples. You know Kevin, you'll get to know me. I hope you judge us both to be men of strong Christian character, but there are some issues on which we differ. and I know we'll have an opportunity to talk about those tonight. I would appreciate your consideration and your vote in the August primary. God bless you.
Thank you. Mr. Daley?
Thank you. And,
I advise no applause, but obviously that went out the window. Please, no applause. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to be. Actually, I think probably most everybody in the room knows me because most of you folks are from Lapeer County, lifelong resident here, and served as your state representative for 6 years. So I've been in front of this group from its beginning. I remember when I was running for this office 8, 9 years ago, being in North Branch at different events with the Tea Party. I remember the very first Tea Party rally in Lansing, which was held. I've got photographs out of my office window looking down over the front of the Capitol building which should have been about 4,000 or 5,000 people, but I think the media said there was 1,200 or something there. It was amazing when we had the Right to Work rally over there. They said there was 10,000 people, and it was about the same amount of people. So it's kind of interesting to me to see that. But for those of you that don't know me, I just live about 5 miles from here, lived there my entire life. In fact, we've got a road just a quarter mile down here named Daley Road, named after my family. It wasn't named after me. I haven't been there for 130 years, but we've been there 137 years. I ran for the House after serving for 24 years for the township government as a township trustee, then treasurer, then supervisor in the center of Lapeer County at Arcadia Township. And then I decided to get really crazy and ran for the State House 9 years ago and was successful in that race and then served 6 years. So believe it or not, when I went in the House 8 years ago or 9 years ago, I was the only active farmer in the state legislature, which to me was really hard for me to believe in this agricultural state, and especially in our district, how important agriculture is. So I became the go-to guy for the State House in agriculture. I spent my the first 6 years on the Ag Committee, the last 4 years as chair of the party, so as chair of the committee. But yeah, we've got a lot of issues to discuss tonight. We'll get into those issues, and we'll take them when we get them. So thank you.
Thank you. Kind of going on the same general track, Mr. Glenn, if you want to stand up and give us a little bit of background, wife, children, what you do for a living besides being in the state legislature, because again, with term limits, we don't have permanent politicians. So if you give a little background on that, we'd appreciate it.
As I mentioned, As I mentioned, I was raised by a World War II Marine. Military service is important in my family, going all the way back to Stephen Cash, my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, who served with Colonel Washington's regiment in the French and Indian War. So our family's military service goes back before there was even a country. My wife and I have been married 35 years. This March 4th, we found out after we got married that we had the same anniversary as Ron and Nancy Reagan. So one of our treasured mementos is I wrote a happy anniversary note to the president, and I got one back on White House stationery, which we framed on the wall. My wife and I have 5 children. The last one left home last May, so we were empty nesters. We used to have a 5-bedroom house. Annette and I didn't need 5 bedrooms anymore. And I've had some health challenges, which meant that it wasn't quite as fun to go out with a hacksaw and a chainsaw in the 5 acres and clean out the woods every spring. So we have moved, downsized significantly. We have 6 grandchildren. Thankfully, 5 of the 6 live in Michigan, and the 6th one we think is coming back home from California. My son is a senior rocket propulsion measurement technician for Virgin Galactic in Southern California. But he wants to design the rockets instead of just test them, so he's going to come back and go to University of Michigan and get his aeronautical engineer. So we'll be happy to have that 6th granddaughter back in Michigan. And that's one of the success stories for Michigan in the last 5 years under total Republican control, is the creation of jobs that could bring our kids back.
Thank you. And again, Mr. Daley, if you want to share some of that information for those of us who don't know you that well.
Okie doke. Yeah, my wife and I have been married. It'll be 40 years this April. In fact, she's here. Stand up, Debbie. She'll just wave. She'll just do the famous the parade wave for us. But yeah, and we have 4 children. Gary's got me beat with 6 grandchildren, but we're hoping we're going to have another one yet here too. But we have 5 grandchildren. 2 son-in-laws, daughter-in-laws. Most of the people here know my youngest son was killed. We lost our youngest son 7 years ago, so we will miss those grandchildren. But my background again. My father was the farmer on the farm I live at. My kids are the 5th generation to live there. So we've got strong roots here in this community, and so that's my background.
Thank you. Okay, starting with you, Mr. Daley. what qualities will you bring to the Senate seat representing this area? What specific qualities can you highlight that you have?
Okay. I consider how long have I got on this, though? 90 seconds?
90 seconds.
Okay, 90 seconds. I believe my qualities are my ability to work with people, my personal belief and my availability to the people of the district. Everybody's got my cell phone number that wants it. If you pick up a card out here at the table, it's got my cell phone number on it. It's the only cell phone I've ever had. So I believe that's important to know the people. When an issue comes up that you're working on in the Senate or the House, in my case when I was there, you've got to have people that you can call, because let me tell you what, there's no possible way for an individual to know all the issues that are coming up. So you need to have a network of people within the district that you can call when those issues come up and how they work out.
Thank you. Mr. Glenn?
Well, I've already mentioned that I think the people of Lapeer County want a conservative to represent them in the state Senate, and the American Conservative Union judged me my first 2 years in office to be the most conservative member of the House. And I've been involved in conservative issues since my 20s in one fashion or another. I was elected to leadership in the House as Associate Speaker of the House Pro Tem, so I think I will be more than just a vote. I think that I can accomplish things for Lapeer and Bay and Tuscola counties beyond just casting a vote on your behalf. I can be a leader and influence others. I think effectiveness, to be an effective conservative, and the fact that the news media judged me to be the most effective first-term legislator, I think it is a tribute to that. And I have what I would characterize, because my wife and I have talked about this, and we both have it, an overdeveloped sense of duty. We think the Lord put us here for a purpose. We're not going to be laying back. We think we're supposed to stand up, do whatever we can. I've always had this strong sense of obligation to do whatever I could from whatever position I held to ensure that my children inherit from me what I inherited from my father and those who came before him, a free country based on a constitution. And so I feel that sense of duty. So much so that when I went through cancer about 18 months ago, I have, over 3 years, never missed a vote, never missed a caucus or a committee meeting, even including the 5 months when I was going through chemotherapy. Thankfully, it's in remission, has been for about 2 years. But even during chemotherapy, never missed a vote. And I would have that same type of duty to represent you in the state Senate.
Thank you, Mr. Glenn. Next question to you, kind of on the same general area. What do you consider the role of a state senator? In other words, the function. You've been in the House. What do you see as the role of the state senator? Could you expand on that a little bit?
Well, to represent the people, but the first thing we do is swear an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the state of Michigan. So I think to be true to that oath, that should be the first part of the job description. To serve the people, to represent all the people. Now, what does that mean? Because the liberals will often attack conservatives and say, well, you're not representing all the people. Let me define for you what it means to me to represent all the people. If, for example, an issue comes up on abortion, I'm pro-life. I'm going to vote pro-life. I'm telling you that now. If you vote for me, if I'm your senator, you should not be surprised if I vote pro-life. I cannot both vote pro-life and pro-abortion at the same time. So it's a physical impossibility to represent the views of all the people. I'm going to vote conservatively. But if somebody needs help with an issue regarding state government, whether it's Medicaid or DEQ or something like that, as is the case with my House office, my Senate office would never ask somebody's partisan affiliation or where they stand on any issue. It would be my duty to represent and advocate for you as citizens of this district, regardless of any of your political views, whether or not you supported me, whatever. But just to be clear, I believe in not being a hide-the-ball candidate. I'll tell you up front how I'm going to vote. If I'm elected, that's how you should expect me to vote. And I think that would be one of the things people say about me, is that I'm consistent. I vote the way that I tell you I vote when I'm asking for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Daley?
So the question is the difference.
Well, the question basically is, what do you consider the function of a state senator? What role does the state senator play as far as legislation, representation, things of that nature?
Okay, a combination of all the above. Obviously, you know, we represent the people. We represent a much larger area. There's only 38 senators in the state of Michigan. There's 110 representatives. People ask me sometimes, why don't you run for Congress or something? And number one, my wife would kill me if I even thought about that. But number two, I have no desire to go to Washington, D.C. because I don't know how, I feel sorry for Paul Mitchell, I'll tell you what, because I don't understand how you can never accomplish anything down there with what's going on. Our country's in a big mess, folks. It's a really big mess. What's going on this last week or so with the guns, the shootings at these schools and stuff. It's just a sad day, and it's a tough time. But we have to represent the people. But we represent more people in the Senate than we did in the House. So it's about 220,000 people in the district, or approximately that many. There's about 90,000 in a House district. So it's a larger group. It's a bigger area they have to cover. But the number one job, I believe, of it is the legislation that you have to review and look at and take votes on that affect the people of the state. And it's very important that we have that connection that I was talking about before, those people, so that we can make those decisions.
Just your next question to you, Mr. Daley, is kind of a general question. I'm sure it'll get more specific. With recent events that have taken place in Florida, if you're elected to the state Senate, are there any specific pieces of legislation, or what position would you take to try to ensure that something like that does not happen here in the state of Michigan?
You know, and I just had a conversation with our local sheriff this afternoon. He was going to try to be here tonight, but he's gone to the MTA meeting to discuss this very thing. And I'm so impressed with what we did here in Lapeer County in electing Scott McKenna as our sheriff, because he said to me today he's out working already, because if this happens again, we want to be, not that it's going to happen in Lapeer, we don't want to have this discussion anymore. Lapeer needs to be protected. And he's working, and he says he's listening to anybody. What he's going to these meetings for is to listen to people's ideas. What can they do? We've got to protect our kids. When I was in the House, we passed some legislation presented by Senator Green, and we passed it, sent it to the governor's office, and he vetoed it. And that would allow concealed carry in schools. And I think we have got to get rid of this idea that that's a free place to go in and, you know, anybody can walk in there with a gun and nobody's got a gun. My wife's a school teacher. I'm concerned with her being in a school with people. And then, I'm sorry if some of you are open carry nuts, but I think it's crazy to open carry into a school. There's absolutely no reason for it. I've been meeting with superintendents in the whole Senate district. I've met with, I think, all of them now in Tuscola and Bay counties personally. And every one of them, I say to them, you know, there is no doubt that people are concealed carrying in your schools right now. You don't have a metal detector when you walk in. You don't know if they've got a gun or not. And I wouldn't be a bit surprised if they're walking in there with their guns anyway, and good for them. But I think that we need to come up with a way to allow the administrators to let the people in the schools.
Thank you.
Go ahead, ring the bell.
Thank
okay.
you. Mr. Glenn, same question.
I'm a life member of the NRA. I named my firstborn son Heston. I actually had the privilege of working with Mr. Heston back in the 1980s, and one of the pinch-me moments of my life. He used to call the Second Amendment the first freedom, because it's what guarantees all the other freedoms promised us in the Constitution. I had my staff, after the Florida incident happened, call the NRA, also start researching Florida and Alabama proposals that would allow local school boards the option of allowing trained school personnel to carry concealed on school property. I'm the lead sponsor of a package of legislation called constitutional carry, so that you no longer have to ask the government's permission or pay the government a fee to be able to exercise your Second Amendment right to concealed carry. I'm the sponsor of a bill that passed the House 103-5 to say that military personnel, while on duty, may concealed carry. That was in the wake of the shooting that took place in Chattanooga. So I am known in the House as being a strong advocate of our Second Amendment rights. And I agree with Kevin that a gun-free zone is a killing zone. It's an invitation for somebody with a gun to go to a place where they know nobody's going to shoot back. Now, this is one of those issues where I think you ought to judge us as candidates based on what we do, not just on what we say. The last time I ran for office in 2016, I got an A+ grade from the NRA and was endorsed by the NRA. And the last time Kevin ran, he got a B- and was not endorsed by the NRA. So the NRA at least judges there to be a distinction between us. And if that's an important issue to you, I hope you'll consider that. Since
you were mentioned, you got a 30-second rebuttal on that, Mr. Daley.
Well, absolutely, and all I can tell you is that I've been endorsed by the. I'm not going to be endorsed by the NRA when I'm running against Mike Green. I can tell you that. For all of you that know Mike Green, who was the gun guy in in the state Senate for all the years. I'm not going to get an endorsement in that one. I've been endorsed by the NRA in the past. To my knowledge, I'd had an A- rating. I'm not exactly sure. I haven't figured out for sure yet why I got a B- rating the last time. But you know what? I'm not bought out by anybody. And I don't think that the NRA, I don't think a B- is that bad. If I got Bs in school, I was pretty happy with it. So.
Thank you. Thank you. Next question to you, Mr. Daley. What position? Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm sorry. Mr. Glenn, you're next. That's fine. We got plenty of time. There's not a lot of candidates today. This kind of question, what's your position on the Enbridge pipeline that's under the Straits of Mackinac, number 5? Do you take any position on that if you come into the Senate about renewing the oil going underneath in the Mackinac Straits?
Chairman of the House Energy Policy Committee, so this is something that we have paid attention to. I have toured their various facilities. I've seen the unusual thickness of that pipe. It is seamless. They actually took a long piece of metal and bored the middle out. They didn't curl metal together and then weld it. It's actually seamless. It's very flexible, and hundreds of thousands of gallons go through it, both natural gas and propane, essential not only to the economy of Michigan, but to Canada and to other states surrounding us. So it's an essential part of our economy. And I think, think about it. Remember what happened to the company down in the Gulf that had the big oil leak, and how many hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars it cost them. Nobody's going to try to be more careful, because if something happened to that pipeline under the Straits, it would probably put Enbridge out of business. So I suspect that they have a very highly developed sense of self-interest financially to make sure nothing happens to that pipeline. We obviously ought to be aggressive in our oversight of anything having to do with protecting our Great Lakes and the environment. But from what I have seen so far, it looks to me like appropriate steps have been taken. The governor came up with a new agreement with them to ensure that over the coming decades they continue to maintain it safely.
Thank you. Mr. Daley?
Yeah, I don't think we'll differ much in this one. You know, I haven't toured the facility. I haven't looked at the pipe. It's interesting to hear that they bore that in a single continuous piece. But you know, the testing that's being done, that has to continue to be done, has to be oversight there. But we can't afford to lose that pipeline underneath the Enbridge pipeline up there. And what happens if we shut that down? You think our roads are in bad shape now? Wait till we start trying to truck that stuff across. All the gas or all the oil that comes through that has to be trucked across the state. So I think it's important that the state keep an eye on it, review it, make sure they're testing it, make sure they're proving that it's safe, and keep it running.
Thank you. Next question to you, Mr. Daley. Kind of a general question. What will you do if elected to protect our farmland? In particular, farmland is being lost to wind farms, solar farms, things of that nature.
Well, and I would disagree that they're being lost to wind farms, because farmland, farmers are farming right around them. And being up in Tuscola County and visiting the different municipalities up there that I've been up to, I found that, you know, the sad part about the wind energy issue is the fact that it tears communities apart. And the more populated areas they are, the worse it gets. As you've heard what's going on in northern Lapeer County here, it's putting the people that represent those communities and the companies against each other, because some of the farmers want them because they want, let's face it, agriculture's tough right now. It's tough to make a living there, so they want them because it's some revenue that they can get off their farms. Personally, I don't like the looks of them. I mean, I hope they don't come into my township. If they do, it'd be a hard thing for me to turn it down on my property as well. But so I don't believe that wind farms are the problem. Solar farms are the coming thing. We took quite a bit of property out in Lapeer County, where we've got the biggest solar farm this side of Mississippi, I believe. And so it's interesting to watch and see. But and visiting these municipalities, are in the process of making ordinances to control them. The problem they're having up in the more populated farm areas is that the ground, you know, is so valuable up there to grow land that a lot of guys don't want to do it. And if they have them in PA 116, they can't put them into the solar farms anyway. So, okay, with that, I'll give it to you.
Thank you. Mr. Glenn, please.
As I've mentioned, I'm chairman of the House Energy Policy Committee, and anybody involved with the wind issue is going to tell you that I am recognized in Lansing for being a leader in protecting your right at the local level to make these decisions. I voted against the 15% mandate that says that 15% of all the energy in Michigan must be generated by renewable or solar or windmill. I think we ought to leave that to the free market to decide. It shouldn't be mandated by government. There shouldn't be that kind of government intervention in the marketplace. I don't know if you're aware of the MO of these windmill companies, but it seems like the first thing they do when they go into a community is sign wind leases with members of elected township boards or county commissions and the planning commission, so that those officials then thereafter are voting on whether or not to pass ordinances that, if those ordinances pass, they personally would receive $1,000 to $1,500 a month into their bank accounts. If Kevin or I did that in Lansing, they'd run us out of town on a rail. My first reaction was, we need a law to tell people that's wrong, but I've introduced legislation to say that if you have a personal financial interest in an ordinance, you cannot vote on it. I also introduced legislation today, presented it to the House Energy Policy Committee, that would exempt all agricultural production and processing facilities from the cap on electricity choice. Only 10% of the market is allowed to choose to buy their electricity from a cheaper source than DTE or consumers, and my legislation would allow all farm operations to be exempt from that and save tens of millions of dollars, which they could use to reinvest in their farms and be more efficient at producing the food and products that we need.
Thank you. The question next to you, Mr. Glenn. What's your position on a part-time legislature has been recommended by Lieutenant Governor Daley?
As a candidate in 2014, I came out in favor of a part-time legislature. There's only 4 full-time legislatures in the nation. It's Michigan, California, New York, and Pennsylvania, I believe. And 46 other legislatures around the country somehow managed to do their business without full-time politicians. Texas is bigger than we are, Florida is bigger than we are, and they somehow managed to do it. Texas, in fact, only meets every other year. So I, as a candidate, when presenting myself to voters in Bay and Midland counties in 2014, said that I was in favor of that, and my position has not changed. I haven't suddenly decided that I'm essential just because now I'm in elected office. I think we could get by with part-time legislature. I don't buy a lot of the arguments against it. I think lobbyists are most powerful when all the elected officials are in one square block in Lansing, where at the least cost to the lobbyists, they can get at all of us all at once. If they had to go to all 110 House districts all across the state of Michigan, then it would be, they'd have to spend more money to have the same kind of influence. So I don't buy a lot of the arguments that are offered in opposition to a part-time legislature. I'll serve either way. If it's a full-time position or a part-time position, if you give me the privilege of representing you in the state Senate, I'll do it probably on a full-time basis, even if it is technically part-time. I think Kevin would agree that's kind of how it works out anyway. Doesn't matter what we call it, it's pretty much full-time.
Thank you. Mr. Daley?
And that's the way everybody that takes an elected position, even if you're a township treasurer, a township clerk, a township trustee, you can't, at that level, you can't walk into the Home Depot store or Kroger's where you run into some of your neighbors or something and have a question for you. Well, when you move up to the state level, it's every place you go, dinner you go to, everywhere you go out of the district to have dinner, so you don't have to answer questions sometimes. But I've been in front of this group before, and I've explained my position on part-time legislature. I've always been in favor of part-time legislature. I do not like the plan that's going to be on the ballot this time. I think Lieutenant Governor Daley has made a big mistake. I served with Brian Daley. He sat right in front of me my first term there. I think Brian had a lot of chances to design a good part-time legislature and do it the right way. I've always been a proponent that we design a part-time legislature the correct way. We tie bar it to a vote of the people to expand term limits. Not get rid of them, but extend term limits. I think term limits have been a really big problem for this state, but if we give that to the people, a designing of a part-time legislature with the expansion of term limits, we could probably get that, tie bar them together. But my idea is that we need to have representation. If you think you're going to get any representation from Lapeer County with a part-time legislature that they're designing right now, you wait till it happens, and then you call over there and you get some central staff that lives in Ann Arbor or something. They have no ties to this county at all. They're not going to give you the support and the help you need.
In the same general area, if part-time legislature doesn't come to fruition, what's your position on term limits? Should they be expanded, lessened, as far as term limits, if we don't have a part-time legislature?
Yeah, what I was trying to do, and you'll find, for those of you that know me, probably already know this, but I'm not one that introduces legislation just to get my name in the paper. And I'm a guy that works with the people there to get things done. And so we worked on the part-time legislature the whole time I was there, but you couldn't get anywhere. You couldn't get far enough to get enough votes. So what's the sense in spending a whole lot of time on it? But I think that a position like Brian Kelly, that's why I bring that up. The extension of the design of a part-time legislature, when Brian was in the House and then he went as lieutenant governor for 7 years, he's been a lieutenant governor, never bring it up until he decides to run for governor. That's a little not very generous, I don't think. I think that's a shame that he did that. But extension of term limits is an important thing, regardless of whether we go to a part-time legislature or not. You get into office in the State House, you're there 2 years, you're just learning how things are going. The second 2 years, you probably get a chairmanship and you'll start doing something, and guess what? You're in your third 2 years. If you were designing something like a part-time legislature, sometimes it takes 6, 8 years to get that done. And the people that want to wait you out will wait you out until you're gone, and then they can start all over with somebody else. So that's the way the lobbyists work and the special interest groups work.
Mr. Glenn, what's your position on term limits then, if part-time legislature doesn't come to fruition?
The only thing wrong with Michigan's term limits law is it doesn't apply to Congress. I support the term limits law. It allows you to serve 14 years in Lansing, 6 years in the House, 8 years in the State Senate. I've always supported term limits. I agree with Thomas Jefferson that we ought to have rotation in office. Our founding fathers did not intend for people to have political careers. George Washington served 2 years reluctantly, 2 terms, and then went home. And it wasn't until FDR that tradition was broken. We have term limits on the President of the United States. We have term limits on state representatives and state senators and governors and attorney generals and such. We ought to have it on Congress. And the people of Michigan, when asked, say that they overwhelmingly support keeping term limits exactly as they are. And that's the position that I take, consistent with the people of Michigan, but also as a matter of personal principle. I'm not somebody who determines where I stand on issues according to polls. It just so happens that an overwhelming majority of the people of Michigan agree with me that the term limits law should remain as it is and should not be extended.
Thank you. And to you, Mr. Glenn, kind of a general question. How do you see improving the mental health system here in the state of Michigan, and what legislation can be passed to improve mental health delivery?
This is a big priority for Speaker of the House Tom Leonard, who spoke to this organization about 6 months ago and outlined it. He appointed several people in the legislature to a special task force on mental illness. And he points out, for example, that if we have an inmate incarcerated in the state prison system, that it normally costs somewhere around, I think, $30,000 a year to house that prisoner and feed that prisoner and clothe the prisoner. But if the prisoner is suffering from a mental illness, it goes up to about $100,000. So it's not just a matter of being personally compassionate for somebody who's in that position. It's a matter of protecting taxpayer dollars that come out of your pocket. If we can somehow intervene at an earlier process, hopefully keep more people out of prison. And as to specific legislation, I was not on the task force, but the task force is going to make various proposals. I look forward to reviewing those. As Kevin indicated, you can't be an expert on every issue. I have learned the principle that you don't have to be an expert as long as you have access to expert counsel and advice. And so those people who are actually on the mental health task force, I will be leaning on their judgment and the research they've put into it. I know it is, as I said, a priority of the Speaker of the House, and I expect something will be done even in the next 10 months in this legislative session.
Thank you. Mr. Daley, please.
Yeah, the mental health issue, we obviously know we've got a mental health issue problem in this country. And have we made mistakes? I think we've made mistakes. You know, some mentally ill people, you know, we shut down all the mental hospitals in our state many years ago. I don't know when it was now, but it's been several years. And I know I just was reading an article today. I didn't get through the whole article, but I read enough of it to get the gist that they talked about when they shut down the Lapeer, Oakdale Center, Lapeer State Home is what used to be called, and that how the people that were living there, they felt it was like the outsiders looking in thought it was like a prison, but the people that lived there was home to them. And they felt comfortable there, and they had what they needed there to support them. We made a big mistake doing that. And that's, you know, obviously we have a mental health issue when these people are shooting people up all over the place, and those are mental issues. Anybody can hide behind that, but how do we fix that? I don't know what the right answer is, but I know that right here in this room, Brian Kelly talked about that, like Gary said earlier. And he talked about creating this task force and looking at different ideas. So hopefully they can come up with some ideas. I don't know exactly what the answer is.
Thank you. Next question to you, Mr. Daley. What's your position on a proposed ballot initiative that a commission would redraw Senate and House lines for the next election at the time of the census?
The gerrymandering issue.
Exactly.
The gerrymandering issue, and been put together by a very liberal group. Unfortunately, is the system we got today perfect? No, it's not perfect, but from what I've seen of this system, it's worse, folks. It's a lot worse. Being put up by the liberal, that's my understanding, that's the liberal folks from the U of M law, and there's very few lawyers at U of M that aren't liberal that are going to be creating this. You know, is it perfect the way we do it today? Because of whoever's in the elected control at the time of the redistricting has control over where those districts are. That's probably not perfect, but I don't know exactly what the correct way to do it is. But I certainly don't think that this proposal is a good one. It's strictly done on partisan basis so that they can get control over who is and who isn't in those districts. Obviously, some of the gerrymandering that goes on, it goes on. You can see it in there. We're very fortunate to have Lapeer County have its own district. And actually, I think this Senate district that I'm running for is a very well-versed district. At first, I didn't like it when they switched us from St. Clair and Lapeer together and went that way. But being up in that district, Lapeer County, Tuscola County, and Bay County have an awful lot in the same, you know, we work in the same act and have the same type of people live there. So.
Thank you. Mr. Glenn?
I hope you'll remember this. My dad, as I mentioned, was at Pearl Harbor when it was attacked, and the chaplain of the USS New Orleans that morning, he said, "Praise the Lord and pass the ammunition." So I'm going to pass a little ammunition that I hope you'll use over the course of the next 7, 8 months as we're discussing this. Here's a simple fact that discredits the entire argument that claims that our legislative districts are gerrymandered. In the 2008 legislative elections, the Democrats elected a 67-43 majority in the State House of Representatives. Overwhelming Democrat majority, over 20-seat majority. In the very next election in 2010, in the same districts, the Republicans elected a 63-47 Republican majority in the same exact districts. Now, if they were drawn to favor one party over the other, how is it possible that one party in one election could have an overwhelming majority, and then the very next election, without any change in the districts, the other party has an overwhelming majority? What is being proposed by this ballot measure is that a supposedly nonpartisan panel would be appointed by elected officials who, of course, are partisan, and then these people will suddenly be angels, and they'll have no partisan inclinations whatsoever. The downside is that if Kevin or I redraw the lines in a way you don't like, you can unelect us, but you wouldn't be able to unelect appointed bureaucrats who get to redraw our legislative district. So I would be voting no and encourage you to.
Mr. Glenn, next question to you. This question individual indicates that for the state of Michigan to continue to grow and prosper in the future, we're going to need sources of power for industry, manufacturing, things of that nature. This person believes that coal-powered power plants are going to be obsolete soon. What plans do you have to replace coal-fired power plants to keep Michigan moving ahead?
Well, President Trump's policy is to maintain clean coal, and I think that we ought to have an all-the-above policy. And as chairman of the House Energy Policy Committee, this is kind of in my wheelhouse. What I think is the key to Michigan's economic prosperity in the future is to allow every ratepayer in Michigan the freedom to choose where they want to buy their electricity. We see that competition principle work in every other aspect of our economy. We all know the common sense principle that if two competing providers have to fight each other to get your business and you're free to choose, you get the best product, the best price, the best customer service. Back in the 2000 to 2008 period under Governor Engler, everybody in Michigan was free to choose. We had the 4th highest electricity rates in the Midwest. 3 states were higher. We were under the national average in terms of the cost of electricity. But under Granholm in 2008, they put a 10% cap on the percentage of the market that is free to choose where to buy the electricity. So, for example, in my legislative district, there are 5 school districts. The Bay City schools save $200,000 a year by buying from Wolverine Power instead of Consumers Energy. The other 4 school districts are prohibited by law from doing the exact same thing. I was able, as a leader in my freshman term, it's one of the reasons I was chosen the most effective legislator as a freshman, was to preserve at least that 10% market, which has saved Lapeer County schools $2 million over the course of the lifetime of that choice program since 2008. So I think we need a free market approach to energy that will attract the jobs we need for Michigan's future.
Thank you. Mr. Daley, same question, please.
And so what we were talking about was the issue of coal burning
Power plants.
Power plants, yeah. And I think similar to what Gary had mentioned, all of the above. We need to keep. We shouldn't be getting rid of oil. We shouldn't be getting rid of coal burning. We shouldn't get rid of gas. We should be using all and everything above, as he mentioned, the clean oil. When it comes to the issue that the representative is mentioning about the freedom of the choice for electricity, the only problem I have with that at this point in time with that 10% is and schools is not a problem because schools get, that's our tax dollars that are running those schools. But you start putting this out to private businesses and private enterprises, it either has to go to everybody or not just a percentage, because I don't think that's fair. I don't care for the idea. I mean, I'm an agricultural guy, and I'm going to support agriculture all I can. But why should agriculture get that break when every other business doesn't get that break? So if we're going to give it to some, let's give it to all, and let's go to freedom and choice to everybody. And we've got to be really careful doing that because we've got some big companies that employ a lot of people in our state. We're going to bring in outside companies from other countries and states to supply fuel to us. So we just got to be really careful on how it's done. And as chair of the committee, I'm sure he's keeping track of that. So.
Next question to you, Mr. Daley. In this Senate district, kind of a semi-rural area, what do you see are the priorities as far as improving the infrastructure in this area? Is it roads? Is it bridges? Is it Wi-Fi? Is it broadband? What would you say? What would you concentrate on?
Well, probably all of the above, but one of the issues that I was doing even when I was township supervisor was broadband. And obviously we've got road problems. I'll tell you what, one thing, folks, go up into Tuscola County where those windmills are. They've got some of the most beautiful roads in the world because they're getting the revenue from them, and they are agreeing to fix those roads up when they come in there. So they've got beautiful roads up there, but we've got a real broadband problem. We need that broadband across the state. We need that fixed. It's my understanding that the governor is working on that. He's started a process to get that spread out. AT&T is working on an issue with the enhanced 911, which will end up, if it passes and if it goes in place, you'll end up paying about $1. I think it's $1, about $12 a year, I think. And maybe Gary can touch on how much that costs to put an enhanced 911, which would create a process of creating more towers around the state. But you would be able to use your cell phone no matter where you're at. So you got out in these rural areas. If you have an accident or something right now, or if your kid has a phone and they disappear, they can actually find them and track them down that way. Some people may not like that because they think it's too easy to find people, but there's two different ways to look at that, I guess. If you've got a problem and you need help, they'd be able to track you down. But that is going to help. If that goes into place, that will certainly help the broadband service around the state.
Thank you. Mr. Glenn, please.
Thank you, sir. I serve on the House Communications and Technology Committee, and we are, in fact, looking at broadband expansion across the state of Michigan. The Democrats' proposal is to have taxpayers pay for it. The Republican approach to it is to remove impediments to private companies deciding to do that at their own expense so that taxpayers don't have to pay for it. And right now, one of the big impediments is the fees that are charged by local governments for rights of way. There was, in fact, I believe in Lenawee County, the most outrageous example that I heard was that broadband was going to be expanded into a little subdivision that would service about 300 homes, and it was going to cost $700,000 in permit fees. And the most astonishing thing about it was the company did it. But they're not always going to do it, and as long as those barriers remain, then we're not going to get the broadband expanded out into rural areas that everybody agrees we want to do. So I plan to support that legislation. I voted for it coming out of committee. It's currently sitting on the House calendar awaiting consideration. The other thing, of course, would be in terms of infrastructure is our roads. We're going to pass, it's my expectation that in the next couple of weeks the House and the Senate will pass $175 million in additional money to put construction projects underway right now on our roads. And I just looked at the printout on the way over here, and Lapeer County would get $769,000 additional dollars for road construction on top of the $600 million that's coming from the state already.
Thank you. This be the last question before your summations. This questioner indicates that they like both of you. They feel both of you are well qualified. They're asking you to say what distinguishes you from the other individual without saying disparaging things about the other individual, if I could add.
Well, let's qualify it. Is it disparaging if I say I stand on this side of the issue and he stands on the other side? I don't think that's disparaging. It's just the facts. If you happen to agree with his position, you'll think it's positive if we state the facts. But something that has nothing to do with our track records. It means a lot to my family that I'm a veteran. So I'll be the only veteran in the race, and serve on the Military and Veterans Affairs Committee for the last 3 years. So that's an important thing to me. If it's important to you, hope you would take that into account. I've already mentioned the fact that the NRA makes a distinction between us. Votesmart.org, if you go to them, they graded, according to the NRA, Kevin's voting record at 57%, mine at 100%. So that's a little bit bigger distinction than just the A+ and the B-. So if that's an issue that's of concern to you, you might take that into account. You remember the $2 billion road tax increase that was voted on by the legislature? Appeared on the May 2015 ballot. 88% of the voters in Lapeer County voted against it. Mr. Daley voted in favor of that. I was a leader of the campaign, along with Paul Mitchell of the campaign against it. Paul and I were on Channel 5 on a TV debate, debating against it. So that's a clear distinction. And everybody remember the pension tax. The first time that the income tax was applied to pensions, Mr. Daley voted in favor of that. I'm a co-sponsor of legislation to repeal it. There'll be other issues over the next 5 months, but those are some that I can think of right off the top of my head.
Thank you. Mr. Daley, please.
Thank you. Well, let's start with the issue of trying to claim that I voted to raise your taxes. Ladies and gentlemen, if you know what he's talking about the vote that you voted on, that we did in the wee hours of a morning when we worked together, and this is what I'm talking about, when you work together to change something, because actually the following term, when Mr. Glenn was there, they voted to raise the taxes anyway. You should have been working to stop that if you really wanted to stop that. We were working to stop that vote, so we voted to put it on the ballot for you to decide. I'm very confident. I find it interesting that he throws Paul Mitchell's name out there, because Paul Mitchell is endorsing me, full well endorsing me, absolutely. Paul doesn't have a problem with it. So I don't know where that issue is coming from. When it comes to the gun, the 57% and the 100%, ladies and gentlemen, we didn't even serve at the same time. I served in 2014. I left in 2014. He came in the following year. So we can't compare apples to apples with those kind of figures. Whatever is going on here, I don't know. But I don't play these kind of games. I think we should be talking about the issues, not trying to rate two people by rates from liberal. VoteSmart, go ahead and check out VoteSmart. VoteSmart is an organization that's very liberal, very left-leaning, and they make stories up to make good public policy or good public attention to their facility and their site. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now we've got 1 minute for closing statements. Mr. Daley, you go first this time.
Okay. Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to thank you again for, I don't know how many times, I can't count how many times I've been in front of the Tea Party here, in this very room and over at the other church over on Maple Grove Road. Yeah, Maple Grove Road. As I mentioned before, when I came in here, the Tea Party was new, and I've been on your side right from the beginning. My opponent is going to try to call me a tax and spend guy. It's absolutely bizarre. You guys know me. The sad part about this is going into two counties that don't know me as well, I'm going to need your help. So I appreciate your help. Some of the things that we did for a tax and spend person, we eliminated the MBT while I was in office. We started the process to eliminate personal property tax. We started the process, which they've continued on since we started this, sales tax on the difference in car purchases, Renaissance zone income tax credits, income tax rollback. We rolled back the income tax. We increased the personal exemption from $3,700 to $4,000. We did all those issues when I was there, coming out of the Granholm era. So I appreciate the time to be here tonight, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Glenn, please, 1 minute.
I couldn't agree more that this debate ought to be about issues, not personalities, not about where people live, but by where they stand on the issues. If you pick up the Lapeer County Press article on your way out, which is right out there on the table, Kevin said the day after he voted in favor of the $2 billion tax increase that it was historic and sustainable and would lead to smoother and safer roads. Now he says, as he did at the Republican Women's Forum, that he voted for it because of how bad it was. But the day after he voted for it, he said he was in favor of it. So that's a fact, how he voted. He voted for that road tax increase. He voted for the pension tax increase. I was opposed to both. So that is an issue of distinction. It has nothing to do with personality. I appreciate having Senator Green's support in my candidacy for the seat to represent Bay, Lapeer, and Tuscola. I have a sense of duty, feel a sense of obligation to do whatever I can. If you give me the privilege of representing you in the state Senate, I'll be an effective, conservative leader for Lapeer County and get things done.
Thank you.
Thank you for your consideration.
If I could have a round of applause for both candidates.
Okay. Yeah. No, I didn't. We invited our third candidate, which is Cynthia there, but she called me a couple hours before we started, and apparently she's too sick to come today. So she wants to do it at another time, and we'll see if we can fit that in. But that's why she's not here right now, because we were looking forward to her, but it just didn't happen. Yeah. Well, like I said earlier, we how
to keep it to 8 o'clock, and I think both candidates are going to be here. If you want to approach either one of them,
just talk to them right afterwards. Yeah.
I tried to ask questions of general import to hear in regards to these. All the questions are here. If you want to go through them, they're certainly available.
And he did a good job. I'd like a hand for this. Very nice. And thank you both again, both of you. We're looking forward to voting for one of you, and good luck to both of you. I mean that. So we'll. Okay. I'd like to take just 2 or 3 minutes because Mike Koshka is here, and he wants to talk about what's going on with one of the issues is the tax situation, which we're all interested in. So I told Mike we'd give him 2 or 3 minutes to explain what's happening right now in that tax thing, and I think it'll interest all of you. Mike, can you come up here, please? Welcome, Mike, please.
Well, thank you. It's a real honor to be here with you all. My name is Mike Koshka. If you don't know, I work for Representative Gary Howell. I believe he's going to be here before we're done tonight. He is at that same event in Imlay Township with the supervisors and the township officials. But I just wanted to give you a brief update. Quick question, though. How many of you have taken note of more money in your paychecks because of the tax cut in Washington? How many of you seen that so far? I have. My wife has. That is a great thing. I tell you, I'm thrilled that they did what they did. But some things had to be repaired in Lansing, and there is a bill on personal exemption, Senate Bill 748, that they voted on. And by 2021, when it's fully implemented, there will be an exemption of $4,900 for individuals. It's going to be wonderful for Michigan. In all, by 2021, that's going to be a $176 million tax cut. It was something the governor initially opposed along with Lieutenant Governor Calley, but the legislature prevailed strongly for the taxpayers. And in the end, they won, and we won as a result. Just another thing I'll bring up quickly. Some of you might be aware of the bill dealing with making English the official language for official business. And right now that is still, it's in the House. It did make it through committee. That's sponsored by Representative Tom Barrett. That's something that Representative Howell strongly supports. And it's not English only, but it does say that English must be used. Other languages can be too. Just the final thing, driver responsibility fees. They will be a thing of the past eventually, but I want to thank you for the opportunity just to give you an update on behalf of Representative Gary Howell. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.